Again, thank you for being here. And now I'd like to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Major General Maria Gervais, who's the Director of the Synthetic Training and Cross-Function Team in Orlando, Florida. The STE is charged with expanding the Army's synthetic training capabilities to the point of need, which will enable units located anywhere in the world to train seamlessly in an integrated live, virtual, and constructive environment. Major General Gervais has commanded at every level, most recently as Deputy Commanding General of the Combined Arms Center Training, where she was responsible for developing sustainable training and leadership solutions across the Army. Major General Gervais is known as a true team builder who values the contribution that each individual makes to a larger mission. You will see that she has a strong vision for the future of the Army training and is deeply committed to leveraging today's most advanced technologies to improve training for America's young men and women in uniform. Please join me in welcoming Major General Maria Gervais.
Hey, well, so good morning. How's everybody doing this morning? Yeah. Hey, so Ben, Eric, and Sue, thank you very much for the opportunity to the opportunity to come speak today, especially something that I'm very, very passionate about. So Ben, first of all, I would never apologize for construction because construction means progress, and construction means moving forward. Kind of like what we say out along our installations. You know, when you hear those guns are the sounds of freedom. So we're never going to apologize for them because that's how we need to train. So anyway, so look, it is a great opportunity for me to come talk to you today because, you know, for quite some time, we inside the Army have been looking at how do we actually leverage the virtual and gaming industry to change the way that the Army trains. And there's a lot of value inside of, the virtual and also the gaming industry from, from a perspective of being able to train from a institutional leader development. But there's a lot of things that we have to think about if we're truly going to deliver this. So I'm going to start off with just telling you a little bit about myself and what I've been chartered to do on behalf of the United States Army and why we think it's so important. So, for the last 3 years, I've spent my time as the Deputy Commanding General for Combined Arms Center Training. And to put this in perspective for you, this is the training that all units and soldiers need to do from a collective standpoint so that they can plan and prepare in the event that they have to deploy and execute what we've been charged to do on behalf of our nation, which is, to ensure that we can maintain the freedoms and liberties that we enjoy so much. And so, as we look at that, and I've looked at how we train and the way we were doing it, we have a lot of limitations currently in the way that we have to train. And that is because we're relying on 1980s and 90s technology, from a simulation standpoint, that has been stovepipe proprietary. And of course, that has led to a high cost in being able to plan an exercise. It takes anywhere from 120 to 180 days to plan a live, virtual, and constructive exercise. We can't train everything live because of limitations on our ranges, our installations, also the limitations because our weapon systems are becoming that much more sophisticated. But additionally, we are limited because of our ability just from a throughput standpoint. So we have to move to what we call a live force-on-force, force-on-training piece to a virtual, to a constructive. And if you think about constructive, just think about a large warfighter, big icons on a map moving. So we have to be able to train from the lowest level all the way up. But the limitations that we experience right now is we can only bring those exercises together at 12 locations across the world, and that's because we have to be tied to facilities. We have a lot of contractors. We don't have common data. We don't have common standards. We don't have open architecture, and we do not have common terrain in any of our simulations or simulators to be able to train. And that causes a lot of challenges in order to be able to train. And quite frankly, ladies and gentlemen, the world is changing so fast that we cannot change quick enough or provide the training capability quick enough to be responsive to commanders' needs or even the world's need. And we cannot even train all of our systems We can't link them all together because of just the limitations. So what you see is what I just described as the as is. Now we can do, as I said, some live, virtual, and constructive training, using things like our CCTT is our close combat tactical trainer, and that's what we train our tanks and Bradleys on. We have our air platform, which is the aviation combined arms trainer, tactical trainer. We have the call for fire, so if we have to call in artillery, we have the ability to do that. We have games for training, which is based on BBS. And then we have our terrain as SE Core, and then we have an engagement skill trainer, which helps us with our marksmanship. But what we see in there is that thing called LVCIA. That is an integrating architecture, which we're trying to bring all these things and link them together. And meanwhile, there's lots of things missing off of that picture. And then you see, what you see down there is we have live, that's our home station instrumentation training system, and we have our I-miles, which is instrumented so that we can do force on force, force on target. And then I described our big warfighter, which is our constructive. So if you take a look at everything I just described on the as-is, and the one thing I forgot to point out was the 57 different terrain databases, okay? Because all these things are different and use terrain differently. And oh, by the way, it takes us about 1.5 years if we want to go somewhere in the world to develop that terrain and get it to work in the simulators, because those terrain databases are all local. So for example, if somebody is in Kansas and they are going to be deployed to somewhere like, over in Europe against that mission, we would have to go to Europe and say, can we get your database, bring it all the way back, and then have to spend 2 to 3 months making it work in the simulators that are there at Fort Riley. So you can see that is not responsive to our needs. But you go to the 2B. The 2B is common standards, common data, open architecture, and common terrain. And we call that common terrain the one world terrain. We want it to be low overhead. And then more importantly, we want to be able to deliver this training wherever a commander needs to train their soldiers. So if you think about it, right now we have installations which are active, and then we have our Army National Guard, which is out in every state, and they have armories, and they have different parts of their elements in multiple states, and then we have our reserves that are all spread out. So we want to be able to do training wherever you need to train it and have it all linked together, whether that's in a live, a virtual, or a constructive environment, so that we can deliver training to what we call the point of need. Now, think this is no different than everybody being on their little PlayStation or Xbox, right, around the world. Same, similar concept. But there's things that we have to overcome that's different than a game, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And so what we're doing is we move into a common synthetic environment, which provides the simulation software, the training management tools to be able to execute all of this, and then the one world terrain, and it's going to converge live, virtual, and constructive. Now you said, I use those words specifically for a reason. Converge, live, virtual, and constructive. Because right now, when we bring them together, there are things that we cannot do in between each of those environments. To me, as we train, those environments need to be one and the same. When we do something in one environment, we need to see the effect in the other environment. For example, indirect fire needs to go from live to virtual, virtual to live. Vice versa. So all of that needs to be lined up, because that's the only way we can ensure a fair fight and be able to make sure we can train different elements at different echelons in all of those different environments. And so you can see that common synthetic environment is the software that's going to make all this work. And then the hardware piece of that is down below, and that's our replacement for our air and ground platforms. And then you see a soldier squad virtual trainer there. And so we got to be able to put an infantry squad. That's nine men, women, that are all right there. They need to be in a squad immersive environment. Ladies and gentlemen, we've been trying to do this since 2006. And the limitations in the virtual and in the immersive environment has not allowed us that to occur. But technology today, we're very close to being able to do that. Now the limitations. Look, a squad has got to be able to move. They got to be able to train outside. They got to be able to see each other. So fully immersive is not going to work in that environment. We can't have the latency. It's got to be real time. And so there's a lot of things that we have to do, but the technology we've seen is just exploding and will allow us to bring this capability in much faster than we thought, which we originally thought was going to be about 2025. So you can see, and then we'll have some emerging efforts which will happen in the future, which is how do we replace our miles, for example, our miles is laser-based. Okay, laser-based means, look, you can hide behind a twig outside in the forest, and guess what? Your beeper's going to go off. Well, guess what? That's not what's going to happen. So what you got to do is we got to make sure we get the realism in this, because if there's not realism and it doesn't replicate that operational environment and it doesn't have us train the way that we're going to fight, it's going to create some very, very bad habits that will play itself out in the place that you don't want it to play out on. And so as we're working towards this, our whole goal, and the vision is actually the Chief of Staff of the Army and our Secretary of the Army, they want us to expand our synthetic training environment as fast as we can. They want us to get to deeper distributions of simulations so that, even as the former Secretary of Defense said, we want to be able to execute 25 bloodless battles before you ever have to execute the first battle. And ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you why that's so important to me. Because yes, I wear this uniform, but see, I understand that the job that I have and I do now is that I have to make sure that I protect our most precious resource, which is your sons, daughters, nephews, aunts, whoever you want to call. That's what we have to be able to do. And that's why this is so important to me, and why I know that if we can do this and improve our training environment, it's going to save lives, it's going to save our most precious resource. And, to me, there's no greater responsibility than I've ever had in my entire Army career than what I'm doing right now. So I'm going to lay out some things for you and kind of lay it out in such a manner so that you can understand what we're trying to achieve. And then my thoughts on what I think is something we're not thinking a lot about, but I think we need to, especially as this market is moving forward, and we know that it's going to explode with wearables and other capability coming in. So I'll say this, STI, it's based on gaming, and it's going to utilize the virtual, you can call virtual, augmented reality, mixed reality, XR, whatever term you want to use, that whole market. But it's not a game, okay? There are things that we have to overcome that have to take it from beyond a game because of the realism that we have to achieve. And so, there's going to be some things you're going to see. But now you're looking at me going, okay, you talked a lot about STI, but what is it? Okay, and I spent the last 3 years getting the Army to understand this and working very hard, because now we're a priority for the Army. We're aligned as one of the 6 modernization priorities. We're one of the cross-functional teams, which means that this is a dedicated effort, not just for the Army, but also for the other services, because we know we have to move towards this. So what I want to do is move from this short video, so maybe it can encapsulate everything I just said, or not, because I figured out I probably don't articulate this as well as I should, but the video will help you get to a little shared understanding.
The U.S. Army must train to win in a complex world. And that demands adaptive leaders and organizations that can thrive in ambiguity and chaos. To meet this need, Force 2025 and beyond requires a new training environment that is flexible, supports repetition, reduces overhead, and available at the point of need. The answer is the synthetic training environment, or STI. The STI will provide immersive and intuitive capabilities that keep pace with a changing operational environment, giving commanders the ability to overcome today's limitations and take on the challenges of tomorrow. Advancements in virtual reality, big data analysis, artificial intelligence, and terrain representation will make this possible. The current simulations within the integrated training environment do not provide the realism, interoperability, affordability, and availability necessary to meet the breadth of training required for tomorrow's Army. The STI, however, will converge live, virtual, and constructive simulations into a single cohesive training capability.
The STI will increase readiness through repetition of multi-echelon, multi-domain, combined arms maneuver, and mission command training. Most importantly, the STI will train soldiers for where they will fight.
One World Terrain has established a proven pipeline from collection through application that reduces the time, cost, and manpower associated with geospatial data generation.
STI will immerse soldiers and units into future operational environments that replicate the actual terrain they will operate on before leaving home station. Our soldiers will become virtual veterans of 25 bloodless battles before the first round ever fired in combat. Short of live combined arms collective training, STEAM will be the most powerful training capability the U.S. Army has ever had.
One World terrain tools are already in the hands of warfighters across the force. These warfighters are collecting their own areas of interest at the point of need. This low-cost capability is organic to a unit, meaning they can use it both at home station and deployed locations. One World terrain tools are built to support tactical decision-making for both operations and training. This support comes through applications allowing users to conduct line-of-sight analysis, route planning, and minimum standoff distance calculations. Above all, these tools give the ground fighters a much clearer picture of a target area prior to being on target, offering situational awareness at an unprecedented level of fidelity. That's where One World terrain is now. And here's where it's going. Researchers are making data more interoperable across the modeling, simulation, and geospatial communities by establishing a unified data model. They're fusing multiple geospatial sources, from satellites to interior captures, into seamless products for decision makers to use. Most importantly, they're building the infrastructure to make global data available at the point of need. To that end, researchers are exploring the integration of high-detail One World terrain data into the command post computing environment to enhance leaders' situational awareness and command and control capabilities. The same data will be shared with users through the Joint Battle Command Platform and Distributed Common Ground System, providing better situational awareness than satellite reconnaissance alone. These same terrain services are available on other mission command applications as well, such as ARC, ATAC, and the Army's newest capability, the Integrated Visual Augmentation System. As One World terrain research continues forward, there are exciting operational possibilities, like infrared photogrammetry, case defense, and change detection. The STEAM will fundamentally change the way the Army delivers training capabilities by enhancing realistic training and preparing warfighters for multi-domain operations.
The STEAM will give us a powerful tool to fully realize objective training levels of proficiency. We'll prepare soldiers for tomorrow's missions and develop leaders to thrive in ambiguity and chaos. The STEAM is the Army's future.
The synthetic training environment, revolutionizing training to build readiness.
Okay, so you see, there's a lot in that video that we're trying to achieve. But I will tell you, I stand up here very confident that it can be achieved because of what I've seen, from the virtual and gaming industry, what I've seen as the emerging technology. And then also, I will just flat out tell you, working with all of the experts in the virtual and gaming market and also academia partners, because as we've talked about this, we have started narrowing down on what are the things that we need to do and what are the gaps or the shortcomings that we need to overcome. So we're very confident, and I've been charged to deliver the first part of this in FY21, 2 years after we just started this. And some people would say that's very aggressive, but I will tell you that that's probably very slow to the way that this market is currently moving. And one of my biggest fears is that we will develop an iPhone number 1 when it's on iPhone number 10 because of how we do things in the Army. So the cross-functional team has been chartered to break the paradigm and move faster. And right now I'm pretty comfortable with where we are. And more importantly, if we get to this open architecture, it will allow us to evolve with technology and do plug and play, which will keep us on pace, maybe not quite on the same pace, but comparatively speaking to something that typically takes 7 to 15 years in the Army to develop, we're moving at lightning speed, maybe not quite to industry standards. So you kind of saw what we were trying to do. So one of the things that I'm very focused on right now is because we've been looking at the training software, we've been working on the One World Terrain, as you saw that, but the training management tools are the piece that I'm very concerned about, because see, the training management tools are the piece that's going to develop, a couple things. It's going to develop the ability to create the scenarios. Create the scenarios that we're going to have to measure. We're also going to have to provide instantaneous AAR feedback. We're also going to have the analytics that's going to drive the ability to shape our future training. So our training management tools are something that we're really going to have to get after. But the one I wanted to really focus on today is two areas. Number one, and you know this better than I do, user experience. There's two things that I have found that's going to make or break STE, and this is my assessment. Number one is the user experience, and number two is the content, because content is going to be king. Now let me go back to the user experience. You know, the current simulators we currently have, quite frankly, they're very sterile. The terrain, I mean, you know, the terrain is just very bland. You know, and our soldiers go in there, it's very predictable scenarios. There's only so many you can run. They kind of know it. And oh, by the way, they come in and they go, man, we were in Afghanistan. Where are the donkeys? Where are the cars? Where are the people walking out in front of you? It's not realistic. And then they leave those simulators, and then they go back to their room and they play a game, which, okay, by the way, has the realism, but it's based for entertainment, right? So they can, all these cool graphics, the terrain, and all these great things, right? And they spend hours and hours and hours on that. I would like to change that and make our simulators to have the same flexibility with the same scenarios, same realism, so that when they come out of doing this, you know, as they're trying for their mission, they're like, send me back in. I want to do it again. I want to get to that next level. I want. Because if we can make it like that, then we can utilize their time better, and we can create the realism, not just for the fact that I need them on the system, but more importantly, the realism that we can create with that will ensure that when they see it the first time, or maybe the second time when they step foot in a theater of war, that they will know. They will have the confidence, they will have the trust in themselves, their equipment, and their team, and then all they have to do is react. So, you know, I think if we can get there, content is going to be king. And so the things that I have concerns about right now is, okay, first of all, how do you generate content and generate it quickly enough with the variables, with the ability to change quickly on the fly, meeting the standards? How do you govern it, you know, as you go through in governance? All right, how do you take and store and distribute it, and also do the analysis on it? All right, because see, if we can't have that flexibility in all of these different pictures, you see all these different pictures? We have a lot of things that we have to do and bring together. Everything from medical, to people who have to drive trucks, to people that have to be on tanks and Bradleys. But how do you create that content in such a manner that you can create it very quickly, you can make sure the standard is being met, you can make sure it's being stored accordingly, you run in the analytics, and then more importantly, how can you distribute it? Because we're going to need to be able to do that across a lot of modes. And the other piece of it is, how do you create content so that, you know, there's things that you do in a certain venue. For example, you know, you got to figure out which venue is best for your training. So something may be purely immersive, and you can do certain skill sets on. Others, you need to be semi-immersive. Other things you need to be, you know, just need to do live. So we're figuring all of that out right now. But how do you develop scenarios that is really focused on increasing that human performance piece and that cognitive piece, improving, you know, ethical decision making, improving your decision making, and then measuring that so that, you know, it's not about just getting to the next level. It's about, you were in this scenario, you made this decision, here were the ramifications, here were the things that should have been done differently, and then provide that information back. Because see, in the end of everything that we're trying to do here, the 25 bloodless battles to get to the first battle to save lives, but we want to figure out how do we increase human performance during these reps and sets, how do we speed the decision making during these reps and sets, and then more importantly, how do we use it to say this should not be somebody that should be a leader, leading maybe your son or daughter because they just didn't have that skill set. And then how do we understand what they're doing as they're doing these reps and sets, maybe from a biometric standpoint? You know, to find out that before they get ready to execute the mission, every time they do it, their heart rate spikes, so that we can come back and train them and get them situationally aware. Those are all the things that we're working our way through as we're developing the STI, because we see it as such a powerful tool. But you can see the realism. Right now, if it goes back, you see, we're doing everything with a mannequin. But you know what? We know that we can do medical training using immersive, semi-immersive, but we also know that you've got to have the haptic feedback to give, you know, the realism to it. Because, you know, doing something virtually, you know, that you don't have to feel the rib or you don't have to feel that area in there, well, that could create negative habit transfer. And that's the last thing that we want to create in our environment, because, you know what? Everything has to be muscle memory. And the first time they start reaching something different or doing something different, that's going to create a big challenge for us, and that's one of our biggest challenges. So content, to me, is one of the most important things that I think we aren't thinking enough about, and we don't often think enough about as we're doing this. And so, you know, I think what we have to do is, how do we develop a pipeline? And that pipeline allows us to really, you know, that is easy to use, straightforward, it's stable, and it's usually to disseminate. How do we define the requirement for the different scenarios? How do we define that so that we understand what we need to measure and if we've actually achieved it? You know, because if you can see, there's lots of things that we're going to have to do, and there's going to be lots of content. And so how should we be thinking about that as we're moving forward? So, you know, I think from that standpoint, you know, I think there's great opportunity here. The great opportunity as we're moving forward with the synthetic training environment. And if you didn't know, the Army's cross-functional team was located here in Orlando for a reason. We we did the ribbon cutting in January. I just officially moved down here, late June, I think it was late June. We have our building over in Partnership 4, co-located with the University of Central Florida, because we saw, you know, with the UCF, we have our material developer down here, PEO Stride. We have our S&T partners are down here. We saw this as a modeling and sim hub. We have the Air Force, Marines, and Navy are down here, and our partners down in the SOF community is right down in Tampa. So the Army located this here because we understood the talent and the expertise that was here, and we saw the ability to really achieve the synergy so we could deliver the synthetic training environment. Now, we're not going to deliver everything in FY21. FY21 is our very first part. We're only focused on that simulation software that I talked about, because that's going to be the operating system that makes it all work, and our virtuals, okay, from a squad to the air, ground, and trucks and things like that. But what's next? What comes in after that? What comes in after that is the live piece, which is that force on force, force on target. For example, Miles, think laser tag, more sophisticated laser tag piece on that. But we have got to fix our live environment too, because our live environment, we have so many challenges. We can only replicate 60% of what is known as a brigade combat team to us, our formations that actually executes the mission. 60% of that. Well, you know what that means? That means 40% of the tools in their toolkit they can't use in that environment. Plus, we're limited by Miles, the Miles system. It's laser-based. We want to get to non-laser-based. And then there's other things we have to bring in as part of that. And then we want to replace our big constructive war game capability, because, you know, we're going to move to multi-domain operations, which means we have to be able to do things like electronic warfare, cyber, space. How do you operate in a mega city? How do I take in that virtual world and have a mega city in what I call patterns of life? How do you bring that city to life? Because guess what? When we go, that city's going to be alive. Wouldn't it be great if we could replicate that city and we understood how it operates, who's the formal, informal influencers, and the city reacts the way we would potentially think it needed to react? So there's definitely a lot on the plate here. But you know what? What I'm so excited about is that we're we're moving in that direction, and it's going to make a huge difference. In fact, I'll end with this, because how much time? What's that? Oh, I do?
You can take some questions if you want.
Oh, okay, good. Oh, okay, good. So, so yeah, so I think the opportunity, we are here, and we can make such a huge difference in the way the Army trains, and we think this is going to be the second revolution in training for the Army. You probably
have a
ask.
few questions, we'll try to take them.
Yeah. Okay. I think the thing on the second revolution in training, the first one was when we created our live training centers out at our combat training centers. We have one in California, we have one in Louisiana, we have one in Germany. But that's high resource. It takes a lot of time and a lot of money, and plus you can't get the throughput. So we believe, and our chief believes, that this is the second revolution in training. And so, ladies and gentlemen, you have an opportunity to be part of it, and we want your help to overcome these challenges. And so I'll take questions.
You have a few questions, we have a few minutes.
Go ahead,
What's
sir.
the greatest challenge you face in merging civilian expertise with military expertise?
Okay, so I'll say this. So first of all, it's us. No, literally. Okay, I'm sorry. I forgot. He told me this mic isn't broadcasting. I should have. So it's us. So one, I will say it is the military, kind of the way that we think about how to do things, and the way we have been doing our process in the past. You know, so for example, the way we typically do it is we say, hey, we need to do this. Then we turn around and say, okay, now I got to generate this requirement. And then I take this requirement and we put it in this language, right? And then I turn it to my material developer, and my material developer goes, now I have to put it in the request for proposal, right? So they have to give you all the specs and everything. And they put it out there. It goes through this process, 5, 10, 15 years. It goes through testing. And then what pops out on the other end, you go, how did that happen? I mean, literally, because that's the way it had been happening previously. So I think the biggest challenge we have is, how do we think differently about it? How do we resist the urge for me to come give you a 40-page document, right? And how do I come in and go, this is what we need to achieve. This is what we need to achieve, and here's why and what it means in a language that you can understand, and then you can go develop it, and then let us be the judge on whether it meets our requirement. So I think, that piece, and how do we bridge that gap so that we're not trying to write the requirement, we're trying to get it to what we're trying to achieve. Number two, I think the other challenge we have is getting us to move fast enough. Because look, the institutional bureaucracy is amazing. And when I find something, I can't move fast enough, even though I know that your technology is just incredible. From the other side, now, where do I think the challenge is as we're coming forward? I think it's twofold. Number one, you need a commitment from us quickly. That one, what you're getting ready to do, that it has legs, and sometimes we can't guarantee that. I think the other piece is that, quite frankly, you want to sell me what's on the shelf. And that what's on the shelf maybe will meet a need, but maybe isn't where we need it to go in the future. I think the other challenge we have to overcome is the whole piece on the intellectual property piece. Now, the Army has just put out a new policy on intellectual property, and I don't want to own it. But we got to have access to the things that we need to have access to, and then number two, I need to make sure that the IP or the little black box that you have is not sitting in the middle, and everything is clamped down on that, and we can't move forward. Because quite frankly, that's where we are today on it. So, I think those are some of the biggest challenges. But then we have to figure out how to stop talking past each other. And that's shared understanding to me is the hardest thing that we have to get to. Because what we will say and what we want to do is that we're describing it. And then I will say that people come up and say, hey, General, I've solved your problem already. Okay, let me see. And then I see, and then it's like, holy smokes, you guys are trying to do all that? My piece only does this little piece. And it's like, well, we thought we were being clear. So we got to figure out how do we bridge that gap. Because see, things we're talking about here is scale is very important on this. And so how do we bridge that gap? I don't have a good answer right now, but I'm working very, very hard on that piece. But I think the great thing is the CFTs is just a great start. And we're making a lot of great progress. No, we have a long way to go with this. And so I think the things we're going to learn through this process is good.
Over there. Stand up and shout.
My question is, what IT security challenges have you encountered in this process, and how have you resolved some of those or dealt with some of those?
Oh, well, okay, so I talked about content here because I think content is the piece that if we don't get content right, look, it'll fizzle out. I mean, we've seen this already previously, so content is going to be very important going forward. How do you govern it? How do you manage it and everything else? But protecting that piece of it is very important too. Because see, what we're going to do with the synthetic training environment from a training perspective, you're going to know almost everything about a unit, their capabilities, their strengths and weaknesses. And so I do not want STE to be the soft underbelly of the United States Army. Okay, so that's one of my biggest concerns. So we've been working very closely to make sure that we have cyber baked in every step of the way, or we're taking it into consideration. But the other challenge we have is that just some of the limitations that we have or policy constraints that we have with our IT piece of this, from an information assurance, from our risk management framework piece, quite frankly, it's stifling. And it actually stifles a lot of the innovation that will occur, in the commercial sector. However, I will submit to you that there is a appetite that I have not seen in the Department of Defense and the Department of the Army in quite some time in my 31 years of service. And that is to actually look at different ways to, one, secure data versus securing hardware, secured but unclassified. Two, we're actually talking about commercializing our infrastructure. So meaning that instead of us managing it, that we're going to commercially manage our post camps and stations to a commercial organization. Because here's the worst thing. We got the superhighway running right into our gate. Once you hit the gate at an Army installation, that soda straw, it becomes even more constrained. And then it becomes bandwidth and latency challenges. So we're seeing the commercialization piece of it. We're also working the 5G. So there isn't anything that's off the table for consideration right now. In fact, we're talking about virtual caps so that we can actually work different ways right now. And then also we have somebody right now that's working with us to look at policy constraints. How do we reduce those? So when you have the full weight of the Army and OSD, we'll start getting things moved slowly.
You right there in purple? Go ahead, shout.
What challenges have you had with bringing other services on board with STE, and then also in regards to funding? Is the Army funding this, or are you getting services to fund this and contribute?
Yeah, so great question. So the question, in case you didn't hear it, asked what challenges are we having with the other services, bringing them on board. Number two, is the Army funding this? And so I'll take those in two different ways. So first of all, I will say this. You talk to each of the services, we know we have an interoperability challenge. I mean, we're all saying we need common data, we need common terrain, we need open architecture, and we need common standards. It doesn't matter who I talk to, we're all saying the same thing. And, we all know where we need to move to. But the challenge we have is, where are we in a service right now, and can we make that decision? See, the Army has made a decision that we want a holistic strategy, and we're going to start and lay the foundation and move forward. The other services are looking at that and saying, can they implement the same thing, and can they take a look at it? The good news is we already have a great partnership with the Marines already. They were on our cross-functional team. In fact, you see They were actually the first ones to take the One World Terrain pipeline and little tools that we created and actually put it in their tactical decision kit. And 24 Marine battalions have been using it before we were. We're working closely with the Naval Special Warfare with the SOF units right now, which is good. Air Force just came and talked to us about they want to move forward to their version of STI, and they know it needs to link to the Common Synthetic Environment piece of it. And the Navy has actually dedicated a lot of terrain. So we're all working together. It's just going to be how do we synchronize how each of us move forward. In fact, I leave here and I go to DC because I'm actually going to a simulator interoperability meeting that's going to be at the highest levels with all the services. So we're talking about it moving in that direction, which is, first of all, great news on that. Because, you know, the real challenge with this is when we have to all hit on the same ground and we want to do a mission rehearsal exercise before we actually have to go exercise it for real. Guess what? We get on the ground and the first thing we're doing is we're fixing what I call the back end. All of that stuff I talked about. We're trying to get our databases lined up. We're trying to get our terrain all the same. That's nuts. Let's get that back end fixed, and then, you know, the end user devices just plug in, right? I mean, so great on that. Funding. Army is funding the STI effort, but we also get money from the Office of Secretary of Defense as part of the Close Combat Lethality Task Force, which is focused on how to improve the lethality and survivability of the infantry soldiers that are in close combat. That includes the Marines and SOF too. So we get funding from them, but we are partnering with the others. So for example, I'll just use this example. So we had done this piece on One World Terrain. The SOF community came in and funded this piece of it, and then they came to us and said, hey, you see this piece? We've incorporated it now. So there's a good partnership as we're moving forward. It's starting to take hold. It's just going to take a little time. But the bottom line is we all know we need to go here, which is good. All right, just jump up and start talking.
So during the video, you mentioned that it was sort of screened for soldiers that are maybe not suitable for combat in the field, basically. And I was curious, like, how you determine that threshold, or how you would make that decision based on the simulations.
Yeah, so you're talking about the screening tool as we're going through. So, you know, I'll provide some of the context for you. So you have a squad, which is usually, you know, a young soldier somewhere between maybe 5 and 10 years that has responsibility for the other soldiers. And then you have, you know, you have a more seasoned NCO, you have the officer, and then you have the evaluators that come in. And from those simulations, from the experience of those more seasoned NCOs or the officers, and also the analytics, from that, you can actually do the screening on that. You know, because look, it doesn't take long to be able to figure out that this person, you know, doesn't react in this situation and kind of doesn't have the demeanor, doesn't have the ability to maintain the calm and give orders, or just isn't getting it through the reps and sets. Not that they're not a good soldier, but maybe they're not at that point where now they're in that position to be a good leader or to lead. Because right now, quite frankly, the way you do it is you come in, you know, you spend your time, you get promoted, you get put in that position. There's nobody, you know, based on your time and what you've done, you get selected. But that doesn't mean you have some of those intangibles that make you into a good leader, or if you're going to be put in that situation that you can actually operate. And so the former Secretary of Defense, Matt, has spent a lot of time on this, you know, being able to talk about running those reps and really getting to know somebody and how they act and how they don't act, because it becomes a good predictor. And so we don't have all of that figured out right now. We're doing a lot of work on human performance and how do you use that. You know, like a good one is, I mean, NFL right now, they know on that line, right? They know on that line, you know, this lineman, third quarter, about this time, this number of plays, right? Only going to be at about 70%, right? A lot of other teams would want to know that, right? Well, why can't we get to something similar? Because we have no way to really measure that other than, hey, you know, Gervais has been in these units, she's done this, automatically makes a great leader, right? Well, is that the case? Maybe that we can increase the reps and sets for them, and then if they're not getting there, if we can show them the analytics, show them through instantaneous AARs, and then focus on their shortcomings, we can make them so much better, stronger soldier, stronger leader, and maybe they stay in that position. Make sense? Okay. We'll come over here and then I'll come back there, okay?
So with the game industry moving towards the direction of hyper-realism in the creation of urban and rural environments, as well as environmentally responsive AIs and NPCs, are you guys able to have some sort of working relationship with the companies that are moving in that direction to avoid having to sort of like reinvent the wheel with your guys' development of your program, or?
Yeah, so so when I talk about development, we are partnering with those industry partners. Because let me say this. So like back maybe 20 years ago, maybe the Department of Defense was the leader in this community. Maybe, okay, because, you know, it's the things we were working on. That's not the case anymore. I mean, you have not just leapfrogged us, you've like bounded 4 and 5 bounds. You're on that big hill over there. So we shouldn't be developing really anything. We should be partnering with you because your expertise is so much greater than ours. So the things we have to focus on inside of the Army and spend are those hard problem sets that the commercial market won't have a real reason to solve, right? And so we need to focus on those things, less on the things that you're already doing. We just need to take advantage of that. So we are partnering. Now, I can't answer specifically your questions, but, you know, I've made a mental note to go back and ask my team. But we are looking for that expertise because that's the last thing I want to do. I just want to take advantage of. I say it like this, and this is the way I've said it before. So we used to be, I'd come down and the Army would say, here's our requirement. It would be 100% different. Make this for the Army, right? Well, now it's like, hey, 80% of what you're already doing for the commercial market that's very valuable, we need that, and maybe 20% is different, maybe even 10% is different. Because see, there's no market really as much for us as this market that exists today and is growing. I mean, unbelievable. So that's exactly our philosophy, is what I meant when I said we're going to leverage that piece of it. Now, a big cultural problem we have is we still think we need to develop it. I mean, that's my fight to take, to go out, because quite frankly, that is not our core competency anymore. And that's what we want to move to. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, well, somebody in the back?
I have a question. So I agree with you in full that the content development, the TMT pieces, the human performance are huge undertakings, right? And they are also some of the most important. They are also the most underdeveloped, right? So these things are going to take a lot more time in 6163, right? 6162, $63. So right now the focus has been on the acquisition cycle and speeding that up and acquiring these technologies. What's the timeline look like when we talk about some of these more basic research problems that have to be addressed? And are there dollars that are going to be pouring back towards that for academics and others?
Yeah, so great question. So because, you know, if you take a look at it for gaming right now, I mean, not a whole lot of really, if you look at percentage of time in the gaming industry, I mean, there's no reason to focus the energy there. It's about 10%. What we've been talking about is, we've been looking at it, we probably need about 50 to 60% of the time on exactly this area of content. How do you develop it? How do you measure it? You know, how do you ensure that it's really achieving the effect that you want on that? So, and quite frankly, you know, we get fixated on the shiny object, right? I mean, it's typically what we do. We got this shiny object. You get the shiny object, it must be good, all right? And that's what we focused on, and quite frankly, it's the wrong thing. Okay, but putting our common synthetic environment piece in place is very important because it lays the foundation. The hardware, and you just have to understand the strategy, going in the Pentagon to my bosses, going in and telling them, hey, sir, our other virtuals over there, they're not working for us anymore. We need to replace this for the tanks and Bradleys in the squad. You get the instant stamp of approval because they can see that, they can see how it's going to build readiness. And then they leave all that stuff that I call it behind the scenes, Okay, it's important. It's more important than the little shiny object, okay? But for a strategy point, we sold it. But what we are doing is we are focusing the 6.1, 6.2 effort on getting after exactly how do you develop this content, how do you measure it, and we've been meeting, not just me, but the Close Combat Lethality Task Force has been meeting, how do you do that and develop it right now? And how do we do it at a point in time that as we put that shiny object out there, we have something and then we incrementally improve it. Okay, because see, we also have things like teaming, manned, unmanned teaming. How do you measure that? How do you structure that? How do you build trust in that? How do you replicate that? Are all the things that we're looking at. So we know we have to put money here. We're looking at that right now. The question is, how fast can the community move to help us with the right experts? So, we're doing some things already across the Army. We're doing some things with the Squad Immersive right now. But I am concerned. That's why I'm talking to you today about it. When my team came and said, hey, you're going to talk to them? I said, I want to talk to them about content. Because content is, to me, is king. We're going to get the user experience. We'll get that one pretty close. I mean, it's linked to content. But the interface has got to be right because we've lost currently on our current interfaces, right? So
what measures are you taking then for the verification and validation of that content?
yeah, so there's a couple different ways that we're getting after that. So we have a bunch of studies that are going on. We're pulling in different experts because it's just not here down here with where we are. We have our Natick soldier performance. We're linked in with them right now. And so we're actually looking at what are the different verification, validation methods that can be used. What are the different companies that can come in and do it? And then what is the best approach for us as we're moving forward? So, we're partnering with, for example, down at Fort Benning. Fort Benning has had lots of, where we've went out and done a lot of studies previously, and we're doing studies with them right now. But you're heading somewhere. So verification and validation, what advice would you offer me? Okay. Because see, I need your help if we're not thinking about this right. So if you have any suggestions, look, man, I'm all ears. I'll never stand up here and tell you I have this figured out or the cross-functional team has this figured out. So if you want to give some, Gary Frost, stand up, Gary. Gary will be here after I leave. But I would be very interested in what your thoughts are on that and how we can move quicker and what we should be thinking about. Okay.
General Gervais, this has been just terrific. You can see we'd probably have an audience stay with you for the rest of the day, but I'm told you have a schedule too. So
okay.
Thank you all for coming. Let's show her how much we appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks. Maybe I should have shut it.
You have 30 minutes, but you got to get across the way back to get prepared.
Maybe I should have shut it down and let him just talk. Oh, that's right.